All right. So, a couple qualifying statements before we get into it. I actually am very excited to talk about this specifically. We were talking about philosophy and ideology 5 minutes before this showed up. And it's been pointed out to me by my mentor and grandfather that I might actually have some interest there, given that the last two sermons I preached out in Raymond heavily centered around philosophy and ideology and things surrounding apologetics. uh, so, first, I want to talk about my intention with how we do this. I know you guys are used to Al and Karen, and Al just doing way more research than I will ever do or ever could do to prep a lesson. My intention with how we do this is pretty simple, pretty scriptural. It comes from Acts chapter 2, verse 42 to 47, which says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. I love this verse because if you don't know the context, this is right after Pentecost. So Peter stood up, given one of the first evangelistic messages. Thousands of people come to faith. And then it gives us a description of the early church, what they did, how they lived, what they were doing. All this to say, it is my intention to do this as a community. I want to have some back and forth, some discussion, things like that for two reasons. One, I think it's biblical, more important reason. And two, I don't actually get the opportunity to teach in this format very often, right? Most of what I do is I preach 20 to 30 minutes, maybe longer depending on the day, and it's just me talking on stage. And the only feedback I get from the crowd is whether you laugh at my jokes or whether you nod along or whether you start shaking your head when I'm saying something, things like that. That's kind of the conversation that happens. But I want to try and challenge myself as well to lean into what we have here. We have a good number of people, but enough people that we can still chat, we can still talk about things, we can still discuss, have some back and forth. So I'm going to try and lean into that. And my ask from you guys is that you try to lean into that as well, because there's and some people on Zoom, so 12 to 15 probably people here. I guarantee you that the 15 or 16 of you combined is smarter than me. So let's benefit from each other. Let's have some discussion. Let's dig into it. So that's my intention with how we're going to approach this. I'm going to present some information, ask some questions. And if you have questions during the talk, this is a little scary for me, but if you have questions during the talk, just put up your hand. I would love to address them in the moment. And there's a very good chance that I don't know the answer, but it will at least be something to look at for next, right? So if you have questions, let's talk about it when we're at it, okay? Oh yeah, if you're online, just send in a chat and Karen can see it. I can't see it, but Karen can, and she will ask. All right, so apologetics. Since I said community, I would like to begin, because I don't know everybody's names, and I have a suspicion that maybe everyone here doesn't know everybody's names, with introductions, just kind of saying who you are, and maybe we'll do you, your name, and what do you think? Like just basic word association. When you come to the word apologetics, what do you think about? Does that make sense? Who would like to go first? Oh, lady in the blue in the back. What's your name?
Funny story. I actually took an apologetics course at the electric. Had no idea what apologetics meant. Went to the class to fill the list required. So I kind of deduced then that it was something to do with apology. And so yeah, I was thinking in this class, going, oh yeah. So maybe I'll do that again.
All right. Perfect. Anybody else? Excellent. Explaining something? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, learn how to defend your faith, which is extremely important believers.
Mhm. 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 Absolutely. Anybody else like to go? There will be more chances to engage, I promise.
I don't read that high. It's a long word. It's a new word.
Yeah.
So I told my friend Danny, told me the text and told me that thing. And in my mind, I'm thinking, defending your faith. I don't think that's the right word.
Mhm.
It's like apologizing for your faith, and why should you apologize for that? You know?
Yeah. Excellent. Anybody else? Last chance? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
If you stay neutral, you deny the faith.
Mm.
And so I've been trying not to stay neutral, and that's why I'm not on Facebook, because I'd be in jail.
I feel that.
F like Frank, E-N-S-E-N. Two F's and all E's. E-N. Then.
Sen. Excellent. Yeah.
And Henning. Henning. And then he goes by Steph. Steff. And I'm Betty June.
Well, we are glad you guys are all here. So I thought it'd be a good point to start with why we do apologetics and where the word comes from and what it is. So first, why apologetics? Basically, you guys are kind of right. It's the defense of your faith, it's argumentation, it's debate, it's things like that. Why do we do it? Well, pretty simply, because the Bible tells us to. 1 Peter 3:15 and 16. And this verse is basically like the theme verse for apologetics for a number of reasons. But I also like it the most because I think it most completely describes what the aim of apologetics is. So it says, but in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. I think sometimes we stop too much because verse 15 stops at this comma. But this second half, this verse 16, is pretty key. But to begin with, to give an answer, these three words together are one Greek word, apologia, which is a transliteration into apologetics. Transliteration is a fancy way of saying we were too lazy to come up with an English word, so we stole the Greek word and made it sound English. So that's where apologetics comes from. And it means a speech in defense, a verbal defense, to give an answer, to give a defense, it's often translated as, and then particularly in a law court. So the imagery that would be evoked for the Greek reader of the time would be a lawyer standing up in court, defending his client, those kinds of things. And so in a pretty real sense, if you've ever seen the movie, God's Not Dead, I think it is, there's this big debate in the university class back and forth between the professor and the student. And it takes that form, where it's one student defending the idea that God is real and alive and active and those kinds of things. So that's a helpful way to think about it, because the realm of apologetics, you get into reason and logic and debate. And boy, howdy, when I started to do some research, did I go down some rabbit trails of different things and thoughts and stuff like that. Like, for example, I preached a sermon on truth a couple months ago. Seems like a pretty self-explanatory idea, seems to make a lot of sense. And all of a sudden, I realized that there's multiple theories of truth in philosophy that all try to describe truth. We can't even agree on the definition of the word. And I went, oh my goodness, what have I stepped into here? So don't be too threatened by it. Don't be intimidated by it. There's this guy named Vodi Bakum, who I like to listen to. He's a reformer type and a Calvinist, so I don't necessarily agree with him on everything, but he sticks to the Bible pretty good. And he gave a lesson on apologetics, and he said something along the lines of, we think apologetics is like the Green Beret, Navy SEAL Christians coming in with all their education to come in and whack down the atheists with their great arguments. He said, no, apologetics is for everybody. Apologetics at its root, at its core, is evangelism. It's just engaging in the areas of philosophy and reason and debate, especially particularly today. And I think in ancient Greece, right, we can see examples of Paul going around and reasoning with people. But today is a world consumed with ideology, with reason, with logic, with why you believe what you believe, and political ideologies screaming at each other all the time. And so I think Christians uniquely today have a really profound role in helping. I thought it was. Oops. Oh, okay. Excellent. It would have been bad if I wasn't. So why do it? Well, what's interesting is the word logic, which is kind of what this all centers around. According to Britannica, the term logic comes from the Greek word logos. The variety of senses that logos possesses may suggest the difficulties to be encountered in characterizing the nature and scope of logic. Among the partial translations, sentence, discourse, reason, rule, ratio, account, things like that, laws of thought, the rule of reasoning, principles of valid argumentation, all of these things. And you might say, okay, great. I'm glad Britannica says that. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Greek word for word, logos. It is my firm belief that any and all genuine pursuit of the truth is actually a genuine pursuit of God. And so even in the realms of logic, he gave us our brain. He understood how we would think, how we would reason, how these things come to be. He gave an order even to the way that we think, even to the way that logic plays out. And so don't be afraid of this. There's a, I can't remember who said it, but there's a quote where it's like, there is no square inch of the earth that doesn't belong to Jesus. There's no square inch of any sphere that doesn't belong to Jesus, including this. And I think as we go through arguments and things like that, you will see both a divine wisdom in how the universe, even intellectually, is structured, but also all of these arguments and debates and following these reasonings down to their roots show God. So that's why we do it. That's what we're going to do. A quick caveat, and this was something that was given to me when I first learned of apologetics, which I found really helpful, because I think sometimes there's this annoyance, and I definitely feel it myself, with the atheists who think they know better than me, or they sound smarter than me, or they get pompous or arrogant, and you just want to put them in their place, right? You just want to tell them why they're wrong, explain to them why they're wrong, but that's not what apologetics is for. So, difference being argument versus explanation. If you were getting into a heated argument with someone over the gospel, I'm going to suggest that you might not be in the right realm or in the right posture. But if your heart is to explain as best you can, through reason, through logic, through debate, the gospel to people, then I think you're in the right place. Another way to think about it is just bringing it back to this, but do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against you and your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. If we turn into the pompous, arrogant people running around with our arguments thinking we're better than people, we've missed the point, right? So another way to think about it, you versus them. Are you doing this for yourself, or are you doing this for them? Are you trying to win an argument, or are you trying to win them over? Another way to think about it, pride versus love. Are you doing this because your pride is hurt? Because I promise you God will be okay. People have been saying horrible things about God for many thousands of years, and he is okay. It hurts his soul and it makes him sad, but he doesn't need us going in there defending his valor like some, I don't know, old school night movie of saving a princess. He's God. He'll be all right. Right? So if you're doing it for your pride, probably not the right reason. If you're doing it because you love the other person and you genuinely want to explain what's going on, then yes. So just a little caveat. And the guy who explained that to me, I really appreciated, because I was 18 or 19 at the time and was gung-ho to show those haughty atheists how they were wrong and how I was smarter than them. That's not what it's about. Another way to think about it is at the end of it, if you win the argument, but you lose the soul, you've lost, right? You've just argued with someone and now they're turned away from the faith. You won the argument. Congratulations. You missed the point. So let's get into it. Logic and debate. We're going to go through some basics, helpful pointers, a couple logical fallacies, just to help you guys be aware of things to avoid and things to look out for. But beginning, this is the number one piece of advice I have for any discussion that happens with anything ever. Define your terms. If you don't agree on the meanings of words you're using, you will not be able to communicate with someone. Like I just said, philosophers don't even agree on the definition of the word truth. And that's a word we take for granted all the time, right? So define what you mean. Otherwise, I have a video here, and I think it perfectly explains the problem with not defining your terms. Works.
You know, very thing that you wrong phrase how they very give you names. My name, nickname, not as funny as my name, Sebastian Dinwiddie. Oh, yes. Funnier than that. On the St. Louis team, we have who's on first, what's on second. I don't know who's on third. That's what I want to find out. I want you to tell me the names of the fellows on the St. Louis team. I'm telling you, who's on first, what's on second. I don't know who's on third. You know the fellow's name? Yes. Well, then who's playing first? Yes. I mean the fellow's name on first base. Who? The fellow playing first base for St. Louis. Who? The guy on first base. Who is on first? What are you asking me for? I'm not asking you, I'm telling you who is on first. I'm asking you who's on first. That's the man's name. That's whose name? Yeah. Well, go ahead and tell me. Who? The guy on first. Who? The first base. Who is on first? The first baseman on first side. Then who's playing first? Absolutely. When you pay off the first baseman, who gets the money? Every dollar of it. Why not? The man's entitled to it. Who is that? So who gets it? Why shouldn't he? Sometimes his wife comes down and collects it. Whose wife? Yes. After all the man earns it, who does? Absolutely.
I think you guys get the point. That's a very famous comedic bit between Abbott and Costello, where the name of the first baseman is WHO, right? So they're both saying the same words, but clearly missing each other by miles. And so be careful of that when you're having discussions, right? Especially as Christians. And if you've been a Christian for a while and you say something like redemption, salvation, things that we attribute certain meaning to and have a certain definition kind of in the Christianese language. But an atheist who knows nothing about the Bible probably attributes a different meaning to salvation. So be careful and define your terms and do your best to be clear. Second thing that's really important that I want to cover is something called an axiom. Does anybody know what an axiom is? Condensed wisdoms, yeah, kind of. Well, went to the old Merriam-Webster, gave us the definition as a statement accepted as true, the basis for argumentation or inference, an established rule or principle or self-evident truth. Cites the axiom, no one gives what he does not have. Makes sense, it's an accepted principle, those kinds of things. The axioms of wisdom, right? A maxim widely accepted on its intrinsic merit. Alternatively, from Britannica, axiom in logic, so in the sphere of apologetics, is an indemonstrable fact or first principle, rule, or maxim that is found in general acceptance or is thought worthy of common acceptance, whether by its virtue or claim of intrinsic merit on the basis of the appeal of self-evidence. An example would be, nothing can both be and not be at the same time. I love how wordy Britannica gets, but axiom is basically just the foundation of an argument. And alternatively, if you go further into philosophy, words change meaning again. Like I said, truth has multiple definitions. Axioms are basically people's core principles. What it is they're basing their ideas and their motivations and their life off of. Right? For us, or let's so with that idea, what are some axioms we have? What are things we take as self-evident or true? God, yeah. I think all Christians would accept that axiom that God exists, that God of the Bible is correct. Those kinds of things. This is a foundation upon what we're building our arguments on. Alternatively, people will say, there is no God. That's an axiom. That's a statement basically of faith. Axioms are a fancy way of saying at some point in life, you have to make a decision based on faith and build off from there. These are the foundation bedrock principles that people are building on. So yeah, axioms we have, more common ones. We believe in like the laws of gravity. We just accept those as things. We believe in the law of inertia when we don't pull out of a stop sign when there's a semi coming by. We accept these as foundational principles. Those same ideas exist in reason and logic. So why do you think it's important to be aware that people have these root principles, these basic ideas that they're building upon? Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is that we said our axiom as Christians is God exists. Well, their axiom as an atheist or an agnostic or whatever is that the God of the Bible doesn't exist or is the wrong God. That's a pretty sensitive topic. And that's the core argument, right? You're ultimately debating between whether there is a God or isn't a God, or whether it's, the Prophet Muhammad versus Jesus, right? So if you understand, like you said, the core argument, you can stick to it. You can bring it back when things all of a sudden you're way out in the ball field when you're like, oh, you want it to be here, right? So that's important to remember. And the other thing is be careful when poking somebody in the axiom and be ready to be poked in yours. It sounds funny and it is a little funny and I worded it that way, but it's true. I had a debate with a buddy who's borderline genius, almost valedictorian in my high school year, is in medical school, is just wicked smart. And he's atheist, or I think he's more agnostic now. But at one point, late at night, he was like, man, I really want to debate. Like, I don't think there's a God. And I was like, okay. So I sit up and we start talking hours and hours and hours. And eventually got heated, got uncomfortable. We both started getting angry. And I realized a great time later, and it broke out in a fight. And eventually I told him to leave my house, which I'm not proud of. But what it was is he was standing there saying, you're an idiot for believing in God. He was poking me in my axiom and it hurt and it was uncomfortable. And it took me a while to realize that hurt me. And then it took me a while longer to realize when we as apologists come in, doing logic, reason, and debate, the foundational principle, the axiom upon which they have built their life, whether they know it or not, we are poking at. So be aware that this may upset some people. You may get emotional responses where you're like, what? I thought we were just talking about logic and reason and debate. But you're shaking the foundation of their life. That can be an uncomfortable and tenuous proposition. So be aware that this is what you're doing. And nothing says that you have to win the soul over, apologize or apologeticalize, however you say that, perfectly in one debate. I think ideally, apologetics happens in relationship over time. That buddy who I'm talking about, we had a big fight. We didn't talk for months because he lives out in Ontario. He's staying at my house right now for a couple of days, right? So like we were able to repair a relationship and he and I still talk. And so if I had just gone down to that one argument where I majorly messed up and got heated and got angry because he was poking me in my axiom and I was poking him in his, I would have lost, right? And I would have lost a friend. So let's remember that, right? Posture of love, care, explanation. So be aware that what you're really poking at is some serious stuff in people's lives and you may get pretty emotional responses. All right. Yeah. Again, right? Because you may not agree on the terms and then you get down to a root issue and all of a sudden you're shaking, right? So yeah, just definitely be aware of that. So I want to go through a couple of very common logical fallacies. These are basically good rules to follow, things to be aware of, things to look out for, because if people are using them or you're using them, you're not going to get very far with actually trying to explain your point. You're just going to end up going in circles or going off on tangents or not really proving anything, just making claims and hoping that it sticks. So we're going to go through 5. Ad hominem, straw man, circular arguments, appeal to authority, and this one made me laugh. The fallacy. I forgot to do a slide on this, but I'll explain it when we get to it. And if I forget, remind me. I included it kind of as a joke, but it's also helpful. So we're going to go in more detail. So if you don't have your notes, don't worry. So ad hominem. Does anybody know what ad hominem is? All right. Well, we have definitions for that. It is appealing to the feelings or prejudices rather than the intellect. An ad hominem argument marked by being an attack on an opponent's character rather than by an answer to the contentions made. So basically, I think you're stupid. Therefore, I don't need to believe in your argument, right? So rather than saying, okay, you made this claim with this evidence, rather than engaging with the claim and the evidence, you just attack the person's personality and completely ignore their argument. Well, you're not having an argument. And also as Christians, if we're doing this, we are not in the right postures anymore if we're just attacking and yelling at people. But also, be prepared for this a lot. This is something you will come across, certainly as a Christian. So can anybody think of an example of an ad hominem argument with that explanation in mind? You're just a racist. That's one we hear a lot nowadays. Yeah, it hurts. Can you guys think of Mom just gave an example, right? Of examples you might come across in the realm, or I have a couple examples. You know, your hair is messy, so how would you know a good place to eat? That doesn't make any sense. I'm just saying your hair is messy. It's not engaging with your argument why Boston pizza is the best place to go, right? Or you are physically weaker than I am, so why would I trust you to do my taxes? Right? Exaggerated example, but it doesn't make any sense when you put it that way, right? You're just completely missing the argument. And again, as Christians, if we're running around insulting people, accusing people, we are not in the right posture that we talked about earlier. So can anybody think of examples that we might come across in the sphere of apologetics specifically? My mom talked a little bit about some that she faced in university. What are common or things you might have seen where you're like, oh yeah, that was actually an ad hominem. That was just an attack on the person when it comes to Christian debate or debates with Christians and atheists or other religions, things like that. For those of you who didn't hear online, but I went to church once and they were all hypocrites and mean, so I'm not going back to church, right? When again, we're arguing about the nature of God, not the nature of people, which funny enough, the Bible pretty clearly indicates what the nature of people is like. Kind of the whole purpose for Easter and Christmas and those important dates that we celebrate, right? Is that we are bad. Right? I think a very common one is, along those lines. Christians are mean and judgmental, so why would I believe in their God? Not an argument. It's just, you're mean, you're judgmental, you're a racist, you're a homophobe, you're a transphobe. All of those things, they're not arguments. They're just meant as an attacks, and they're meant to pull on our heartstrings, right? You should feel emotional about hurting my feelings, so I'm going to hurt your feelings. Argument. Now we're in a fight. Now you've just accused me and hurt me. So, how do we engage with an ad hominem? I think it's pretty clear on how we avoid an ad hominem. Just don't insult people. Seems pretty clear. You're an idiot. That's why you think that. Or you're an atheist, so you think that way, right? Try to avoid that. But how do we engage with that? So if someone says, oh, you're just mean and judgmental and rude as a Christian, why would I believe in your God? How do we engage with that argument? Because it's not really an argument. Yeah, so like restate, come back to the argument, try to not follow it out to left field or whatever. Yeah. What else? Yeah, why'd you insult me? Like, why do they think that? Yeah, that would be a really good one. Why do you think Christians are mean or rude or judgmental? Yeah. Why do you think I'm a homophobe? Why do you think I'm a transphobe? Why do you think X, Y, Z? Right? Yeah, absolutely. Any other ideas? Hmm. Yeah. Hmm.
We don't agree with what they're proposing.
Hmm.
And I mean, God says, and I didn't go that far
Yeah.
because God says he hates sin.
Yeah.
So I didn't use that part, but
Yeah.
on the hate. But we're pushed, the
Yeah.
mayor of Calgary, she's chatting about, the hate thing. And
Yeah.
we're just,
So yeah, absolutely. It's something Christians come across a lot. That's why I included it. A couple ideas, point it out. Hey, that was pretty insulting. You think Christians are rude and mean and judgmental? Do you think I'm rude and mean and judgmental? Most people, especially if you're in the context of relationship, be like, well, no. Well, then why are you saying Christians are? Right? Point it out. Acknowledge your feelings. Hey, that's really hurtful. Why would you say that about me? That's not what I was saying. That's not what I'm about. I was talking about this idea. And then potentially, this is kind of at your judgment, maybe stop for the time being. Because if you're getting to the point where they're yelling insults at you and you're just clearly you're not having a good, well-intentioned, genuine discussion of truth anymore, right? So depending on ideally, again, if you're in a relationship, maybe like, hey, let's table this for now. Let's come back to it with cooler heads. Because it'll be very easy for you. I know this because that's what happened with my friend, to start going ad hominem back and forth things. I'm not an idiot, you're an idiot. And then you are lost and you're going back and forth. That's ad hominem. Keep that in mind. Something to engage with. Again, how do we avoid it? Don't insult people. It's not that difficult of a claim, right? Straw man. Anybody know what a straw man argument is? It comes up in politics all the time. They're like, that's a straw man argument. Yeah. So again, we have some helpful definitions from the university. A straw man of fallacy occurs when someone takes another person's argument point, distorts it, exaggerates it in some kind of extreme way, and then attacks the extreme distortion as if it was the real claim. Basically, they warp your point of view, and then they attack the warped point of view rather than actually what you said or actually what you said, right? So anybody think of an example of what a straw man would be? For example, if I made the claim, I like social programs, what would be a straw man argument against that claim? Socialist. That's not what I said. I just said I like maybe some buses or something like that, right? We're talking about basic social programs, not socialism as a totalitarian regime, right? So he's taking it to the nth degree, and now he's arguing against socialism when that's not what I was talking about, right? Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I said, I like social program. Straw man might be, you like Canada being in debt to China, right? It's like, that's not what I was talking about. We haven't even talked about financial budgets and things like that. We could be more responsible. I like social programs. I didn't say I like China having ownership of Canada through debt, right? Making it exaggerated, crazy, ridiculous, and engaging that, because it's easier to attack that than their actual argument. Another one, if I made the claim, chickens are an excellent source of protein, what would be a straw man argument against that claim? And something about climate change, environmental impact, you hate the planet, things of that nature. It's like, it's just the highest protein content meat that exists for the lowest fat. I don't know what you want. You know what I mean? Right? I made a pretty basic claim and you exaggerate it. Yeah, I said, so chickens are an excellent source of protein. Straw man argument would be, so you don't support vegans and you think vegans should die. That's not what I said, but they're taking it to the nth degree. Well, you like chicken, so you hate people who don't like chicken, and you think that people that don't like chicken who are vegan should die. Pretty exaggerated, but you see what happens is they just go off on this tangent, making assumption and assumption and assumption and assumption about what you believe, and then argue against this point rather than what you said. Grant?
And we had to wait for class.
Blue truck. Thanks, Grant. Anybody in Zoom, your blue truck at the church, is it going off? What about examples we might come across in apologetics? In the Christian sphere, what are straw man come across? Right, if I make the claim, I believe in the God of the Bible, what might someone do to attack that argument in a straw man fashion? You're a homophobe. Or that's actually what I had as my example, straw man. You hate gay people, don't you? Right? I didn't say that I hate gay people. I just said I believe in the God of the Bible, but they're taking it to the exaggerated position and then coming at you from the exaggerated position rather than your actual claim. Yeah. Say gay bill. Yeah. The Don't Say Gay bill was a very, those of you who don't know, in Florida, the governor, Ron DeSantis, tried to, or he did, he proposed a bill where they couldn't do any sort of sexual education, rather conservative Christian-based sexual education or, liberal-based education until at least grade 4 or 5. Like, it seemed like a pretty, in my mind, reasonable bill to be like, I'm not talking to 9-year-olds about sex. Yeah, at all. I'm gonna let them play in the dirt and do what they do. But then a lot of the opponents of this bill came out and said, it's the Don't Say Gay bill. He's saying you can't even say the word gay in school. It's like, well, that's not his position. So they took it to the nth degree and then attacked that rather than his actual proposition. It's a very good, relevant example. That was only a year ago. Yeah. So how do you engage with these arguments? Someone makes a straw man argument, and be careful. It's good if you recognize and say, oh, that's a straw man. That guy's way out to lunch. If you just stand there and say, that's a strong man argument, you're not going to make a lot of friends that way. So you recognize that's what's happening. How do we engage with that? I did not say that. Stops right there, for sure. Explain their position. Yeah, you could ask them what they think. Yeah. Yeah. That's not actually what my claim was. I said X. You said Y. I said X. Right? Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Attempt to clarify your position. Restate what it is you actually said. Maybe they just misunderstood you. Try to give people the benefit of the doubt, but just try to attempt to reassert what it is claimed. Right? Ask them what it is you two are talking about. Right? So if I say, I believe in the God of the Bible, and they say, you must hate gay people, be like, what are we discussing? Are we discussing the ethics of homosexuality, or are we discussing the nature of the God of the Bible? Because I'm just trying to get to the root assumption that God exists, let alone whether or not you think it's the God of the Christian Bible. You have got to, right? So clarify what it is you're talking about. Do not, this is something that happens to me a lot. Do not get caught up chasing straw man. Stick to the topic, because it's all of a sudden, well, you hate gay people. Well, no, actually, this offset, and you're way over here, and you're trying to talk about whether or not. So don't get caught up. I like what Verl said. I didn't say that. I said this. Try to stick to the topic, otherwise you're gonna be stuck there for a while. And then how do we avoid it? Basically, something that this is a psychological principle that a lot of counselors will do, called mirroring. And so if I came to a counselor and I said, hey, I'm really struggling with my marriage because of XYZ. And they say, okay, you're struggling with your marriage because of XYZ. And then they'd say or give their advice or whatever. So someone says, I don't believe in the God of the Bible because of, I think modern scientific theory is enough to support the existence of the universe. Okay, so you don't believe in God because you follow the modern scientific theory of the Big Bang and evolution and such, right? Right. Now you know for sure you're engaging with the right argument, right? So just restate what they said. It'll also help you listen to them better, right? Because we're not about winning arguments. We're about listening to people and explaining. We're about love, we're about service, those kinds of things, right?
Drug injection site,
Mm,
that they don't want to hear about the fact that there is an alternative for
Mhm.
rehabilitation. Just want to do it quick. And that's a big thing.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Circular argument. Does anybody know what a circular argument is? The name is a hint, but let's read the definition. In a circular argument, the same proposition occurs as both the premise and the conclusion. The argument validates itself. However, self-validation is a poor reasoning. An argument's claim needs to be supported by actual evidence. It is often claims without evidence, but rather just more claims, right? So often you'll say, yeah, kind of. Yeah. Yeah, so what are examples? Defining the word woman by using the word woman. That's become a hot topic. Oh my goodness. What are some other examples of like a circular argument? I don't think of it, you know how you often say, I think, make a claim, here's my evidence. Often what it looks like is, here's my claim because of another claim. You know what I mean? So what are examples of that? The Bible is true because it says so. That's a circular argument. You haven't made any evidence or you just picked claims. Yeah, exactly. Right. I said, example. Yeah. Our government is really successful because they govern well. Well, no, I just said the government's good twice. I didn't make any actual evidence. I didn't bring forward any evidence. I just made claims, right? Or Boston Pizza is the best restaurant because it has the best food. For those online, Pearl said that that's an axiom. But yeah, I didn't bring any evidence. That one's a little harder to detect, right? Because you might think, yeah, the best food makes a good restaurant. But I'm just saying I want to go there twice. That's all that I'm saying. I'm not really bringing any evidence. I'm just making claims about the restaurant. What are examples in the apologetic world, in the Christian debate sphere? What are circular arguments we may come across? Pearl gave us an example of one we sometimes use. Well, the Bible's true because God said it's true. Well, the Bible says that God's true, and God says the Bible's true, and the Bible says that God's true, and the Bible says the Bible's true. It's just a longer, right? It's true. Obviously, we believe that, but not a good way of explaining that, perhaps. What are other examples we come across in the Christian sphere? The one I have is, there is no God because the world was not created. That's just saying there's no God twice. It's not actually any more evidence. That's just two claims. Well, there's no God because the world wasn't made. And the world wasn't made because there's no God. If you can just keep going back between two claims, you've made a circle. So don't do that, right? So how do we engage with that? How do we engage with circular arguments? Point it out lovingly. That's a circular argument. You're wrong. No. Hey, you made the claim that, right? Like we said with the previous one. So you're saying there's no God. What's your evidence for that? Right? You don't necessarily have to point out something, but just clarify, because we have the benefit of trying to understand these things for the person we're listening to, not just so we can win arguments, right? We want to actually get to what they believe and why, so we can discuss it with them. That's why we're looking at these. Right? Some ideas I had: ask them to state their claim and evidence. Okay, so you said that you believe there's no God. Why do you believe that? Ask them why they believe the claim they just made. Just what I said, right? So there's no God. Why? Simply begin engaging their claim or claims rather than engaging their evidence, right? So there's no God because the world wasn't created. Well, I disagree with you. I think there is a God who created the world. Discussion. You don't have to necessarily engage with this one, but it's good to point out, especially if they keep just making claims and not actually presenting evidence. Eventually, why do you believe that? And be careful, because if they don't have any evidence, when you ask, why do you believe that? You've poked directly at their axiom. And as we discussed, that hurts. So just be aware that that will be uncomfortable for them. So be gracious and loving and kind. How do we avoid it? Always a helpful thing, make a claim followed by evidence. Don't just make claims. I believe there's a God given the intelligent design of the universe. I believe there's a God because of the law of causation and those kinds of things, right? Try to follow it up, claim, evidence, claim, evidence, claim, evidence. And if they ask for evidence, give them only evidence. That's how you avoid that. Appeal to authority. This is a common one. Anybody know what this is? It's in the title. It's when you appeal to an authority figure, yeah. So the appeal, sorry, I'm going a little bit faster. The appeal to authority fallacy is the logical fallacy of saying that claims are true simply because an authority figure made it. This authority figure could be anyone, an instructor, a politician, well-known academic, an author, or even an individual with expertise in the related field. What are examples of this? That's kind of what I thought as I was prepping it too. Oh, yes. Yeah. 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 So a couple examples I came up with. Well, the pastor said it, so it must be true. Not how that works. I have been wrong in my life. James has been wrong in his life, and Dwayne has been wrong in his life. I guarantee it. That's a logical, like, actually engage with what we say. Don't take everything I'm saying up here and putting on this nice PowerPoint and just say, oh yeah, you must be right about everything. Engage with it. Think about it. Wrestle with it. Right? And actually, this is a caveat or small aside. Like I said, I don't do this kind of classroom stuff a lot. If you have feedback for me, I would actually love to hear it. So, yeah. Inverse of an ad hominem. What do you mean by that?
You don't have a good, they use refer to your curriculum.
Yeah.
So whenever, well, I have a PhD in such and such. Right now, you know their argument.
Yeah.
Because they're appealing to their authority.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So other examples I had, yeah, but my professor says I'm right. I don't care about your professor. I'm talking to you, right? Or such and such says it's right. Basically, whenever they go to a figure or group of figures, then probably, like you said, there's no merit, there's no evidence there. It's just these people make this claim. Okay, it's still a claim. I would still like to hear the evidence of that claim, right? All right. How do we engage with this? How do we engage with this argument? Again, all we'll end up doing is arguing with their professor rather than the person evangelized to. So now we're off. Yeah, I ask why their authority believes that. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I have asked them what they think the person or persons, or why they think that person or persons believe that. Well, you said your professor says you're right. Why does your professor think you're right? Get to the evidence. You don't necessarily have to point out every logical fallacy, but just understand this is what's happening so you can engage with it and be helpful. Ask ask them what evidence convinced that person or persons. Again, get to the evidence, just move past the people. And gently remind them that you are talking to them and not Stephen Hawking, right? Because one of the apologetic examples I had is scientists agree that science proves the existence of God. Or Stephen Hawking was a genius and didn't believe in God, so why would I? Well, I'm not talking to Stephen Hawking, I'm talking to you. I'm engaging with you. I don't really care about what Stephen Hawking thought. Exactly. Exactly. And then how do we avoid it? Because we as Christians, we can do this accidentally a lot because we have a good authority and we have the authority. However, if we're having a discussion about whether or not God exists, and I say, God says he exists, it's circular, it's an appeal to authority. The Bible says that God exists. We don't even agree that there is a God, and you're appealing to the Bible. Careful. You're right. Obviously, I believe you're right and it's correct. When you're in a debate like this, just be careful. It's important to include scripture and talk about what the Bible teaches and these kinds of things and why you are making these claims. But I understand that if they don't respect or believe that there's a God, why would they respect the Bible as an authority source? Why would they listen to what it says? So just be careful. I forgot the fallacy slide. Fallacy. It just really made me laugh. But it's actually a pretty important point, and we'll probably end there. Yeah, we will end there because it's 10 o'clock already somehow. So the fallacy is just because somebody makes a fallacy in their argument doesn't mean that their argument's actually wrong. So let's say, for example, someone makes a claim, there is no God because the world wasn't created. But what they're trying to say is that I don't see the evidence for a designer or therefore I don't believe in God. But they just said it poorly. Doesn't mean that what they're trying to claim is necessarily a bad argument. They just did it poorly. So that's why the way we approached all of those was how do we engage with it? How do we help the conversation along? How do we move past it? How do we not get distracted by it? Because not everyone is trained in classical logic and debate and has all of these things sorted out. They're just trying to explain what they think and may not be the most articulate person. So the fallacy is you don't get to stand there in apologetics and be like, have the circular logic, you have to be a Christian now. That's not how that works, or you just made an appeal to authority, so now you have to be a Christian. That's not how this works, right? So understand that you don't just get to slap this down as some trump card and be like, logical fallacy, you lose, I win. Come to church on Sunday, see you there. That's not how that works. So that's what the fallacy is all about. We are technically out of time, but does anybody have any questions on what we covered? So we covered how we're going to do this, basing it on community, trying to have some discussion. If you want to meet throughout the week, those kinds of things. And then we talked about apologetics, where it comes from, 1 Peter 2:16. Talked about axioms, right? Those foundational principles that we might be poking at. I get a little uncomfortable. And then 5 logical fallacies. Can anybody remember what those 5 were, or one of them? Straw man. Ad hominem. Fallacy. Circular, and appeal to authority. If you guys want, I can print this PowerPoint off, or we can send it out in the email or whatever. It was my intention to go through some actual arguments. Did not get there. So I was a little nervous because I was like, I don't actually know how much to prep. So I did try to prep a little too much. But next week, we're going to get into some arguments. And so what I'm going to do for next week then is we're going to look at arguments for the existence of a God. And then the weeks after that, why the Christian God specifically, right? Because there's a lot of people who I think are pretty agnostic. Like they're like, yeah, there's probably a creator or a deity or a something. And so the arguments about why specifically the Christian God probably will take up more of your conversation than just proving that there is a God. Yeah. Pardon me? Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, so syncretism is the belief that there's basically everybody's sort of right, and I'm going to make this melting pot stew of all the religions, and that's my religion. Yeah. Yeah, Jesus says that's not the case. I am the way, the life, and the truth. No one comes to the Father except through me. That one's pretty cut and dry, in case you're clear on that. Any other questions for what we covered? And again, maybe I'll send out my email, and you guys can send me emails, or we could meet and have coffee. I would love to do that. But if that's, yeah. Hmm.
Just wants to go over it. And I thought
Hmm.
it's not like a temporary breakup, it could be
Yeah.
a long term. So I think it more agreeably, I listen to the other, but then I throw it believe in the middle. So is that okay, or should I always state my beliefs distinctly in every situation?
Yeah, so for those that were online, the question was basically, do I have to engage in apologetics in every situation? Is that kind of what you're asking? Like, do I always need to stand up and like do these kind of arguments and stuff? Mhm. Yeah, so by not answering, are you worried that you might be deceitful or something like that? Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good one. It's really hard for me to say always do X or always do Y. There's in Nehemiah, there's this instance where Nehemiah is before the king of Babylon because they're in exile. He's just heard about Jerusalem and how the city walls have all fallen down. And he's sad in front of the king. That's a no-no. That's, you get killed for being sad in front of the king because the king is the sun and the source of life in their culture, right? But the king looks to Nehemiah and he says, "Why are you sad in my presence?" And Nehemiah panics for a moment. And there's a short verse there where he says, "I prayed to God, and then I answered the king." And so some people call those an arrow prayer, where you're just like, "Okay, God, here we go." And you step into it. Trust that the Holy Spirit will work in that moment. There's been times where I've gone up and done sermons without notes where I'm like, "Okay, God, here we go." So I'd encourage you to be bold. But also, like I said, there was like in the ad hominem example, there's times where it might be right just to step back. Because the other thing, if you just have a friend who's going on some tirade because a Christian hurt them, while engaging with them in apologetics because they're hurt, might not be the right circumstance or might not be the right tool for the situation, right? Apologetics is a tool. Rather, you could say, "Hey, you know what? I'm sorry that Christian messed up, but God loves you and I love you." Doesn't have to be a big argument and things like that. I encourage you to use discernment and pray about it, even in the moment. God, should I engage with this? Right? Those kinds of things. And use your discernment, right? Because you're going to be way more impactful with a friendship over years or months than one heated argument, I think. Yeah. Someone said Jesus didn't always answer for those online. He didn't engage with every discussion. If you remember, yeah, like when they brought the adulterous woman before him, he just drew in the dirt and said, "Okay, you without sin." And then he just drew in the dirt until they all left. And then he talked to the woman. But do this with gentleness and respect. And we'll get to this later on, but I will answer this now, is that I think the strongest apologetic tool we have, and I know we're going late, but whatever, I'm in charge. So I think one of the strongest apologetic tools we have is the way we live our lives. If you live your life intentional service and love and grace to those around you, that speaks volumes about the God that you follow, right? So you might be the most articulate person ever in the world and can perfectly, weave an argument and lead a conversation to the conclusion that God is real and it's the God of the Bible. But apologists also, I think, have the benefit and the challenge that we know of the human soul. And so when we talk about arguments, and we'll get more to this next week, arguments that speak to the soul. So things like, okay, you conclude that the universe is without creator. What does that mean for you in your life? You can talk to people's hearts and souls, and that's an important apologetic, I think. Sometimes overlooked because we're like logic, debate, arguments, things like that. But the Bible talks about the soul and the heart and our feelings. So showing love to people should, again, be our first priority. So it's hard for me to say do X or do Y, but I think I would lean towards, maybe this is just a personal conviction, I would lean towards being a little bit, right? Because sometimes someone's in the pit of despair and they're just thrashing about emotionally, attacking anything that's close to them, and you happen to be a Christian. Well, Christians don't have the answer, blah, blah, blah. Am I getting a divorce? I lost my job, and 50 years old, I'm starting my life over. Might be a moment where you say, hey, your life's not over. Your life's always had meaning. It's always had purpose. There's a God who loves you, and made you. That's an apologetic argument or claim, but it's also a claim that is for someone's soul, right? So again, I think if we engage with the posture of love and care and explanation, I think you'll probably be doing all right, and prayer. Sorry, I can't tell you exactly what to do or what not to do, but does that help? Excellent. Okay, this will be the last question because we are very much so over time. Do we want tables for note taking and stuff? Sure. I think we can do that. Let's do that. Yeah, sure. How many people would want tables? Just by show of hands. Okay. A couple people. Well, it was like right. Not helpful. Anyways, yeah. Next week, what to look forward to. Oh, Mike, there we go. Is there a God? So there is a God? Is the God of the Bible the right one? This is the arguing pattern we're going to take. Do we believe in God? And then probably, given how long this took, the week after that, we'll talk about arguments for the Christian God. And probably I will carry that on. So let me pray, and then I got to go teach. God, thank you for this morning. Thank you for reason and logic and debate and all of these cool things. And we can see just the order that you've created, even in the way that something as ambiguous as intellect is structured. It's awesome, and it's so clearly designed. God, I pray that we would engage with, wrestle with, and think about these things as we go to our friends, our coworkers, acquaintances that don't know you, that haven't experienced the love and the joy that you bring to life. So God, I pray we'd use this tool effectively and with a posture of love and explanation and service. God, you are wonderful in every sphere of human life, in logic, in reality, in finance, in everything. You are wonderful, and we thank you for that. In your name we pray. Amen. All right.
Yes, please. Yes,
Yep.
please. Stop recording. Sure you want to? Yes.